Hey, good morning, friends. I just wanted to get back into reading American Miscellany, and I've opened this lovely book up to the title page to remind us here that this is a book of universal knowledge, and it does contain the choicest gems of literature, astronomy, chemistry, and philosophy. So let's get into it. Of course, down here we have the publishing date, 1865. So that is our perspective. But this is such an exciting book full of random essays. We've just finished essay number 96 on cotton bleaching. So it seems very obvious to move on to our next subject from there, which is the importance of self-knowledge. Right, let's get into it. This is essay number 97. We're on page 243. Actually, before we get into essay number 97, we do have this tiny little blurb here between that and the previous essay. That the publisher seems to like to insert these little sentences here and there to fill up space. So it's entitled Reason. So here we are, page 243, Reason. Without reason, as on a tempestuous sea, we are the sport of every wind and wave, and know not, till the event hath determined it, how will the next billow dispose of us, whether it will dash us against a rock, or drive us into a quiet harbor. For that. Okay. All right, let's get into essay number 97, Importance of Self-Knowledge. There is no theme upon which humanity can bestow its attention to more advantage, nor which imparts to its votarist more real pleasure than the pursuit of knowledge. But of all the various departments of knowledge, there is no one which carries with it more importance, which is so intimately identified with the welfare of each individual and hence with the general interests of humanity, nor which is more frequently neglected than that which constitutes the subject of the present article. The duty of self-knowledge has ever been looked upon by the more intelligent of every nation as indispensable to the temporal as well as spiritual interests of men. The ancient Greeks, though destitute of a knowledge of the Scriptures, were not insensible to its importance, but so deeply conscious were they of its noble and decidedly religious tendency that they caused the inscription, "Know thyself," to be consecrated in golden characters on the ancient temple of Delphos. Even Cicero, the great Roman orator, attributed its authenticity to the gods, believing it to convey too much weight of sense and wisdom to be attributed to man. Such is the estimation in which it was held in the darker ages of heathen superstition. And corroborated, as it now is, by divine truth, it falls with increased weight at the shrine of every man's duty. Stand in awe and sin not. Commune with your own hearts upon your bed, and be still. Psalm chapter 4, verse 4. Examine yourselves whether ye be in the faith. Prove your own selves. Know ye not your own selves? How that Jesus Christ is in you, except ye be reprobates. And that's from 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 5. By self-knowledge, we understand a thorough acquaintance with our own nature, a thorough knowledge of our own character, our own abilities, the motives prompting us to act, the prejudices of our hearts, our duties, our thoughts, our virtues, and our vices. A thorough knowledge of these will enable us to meet the responsibilities of life and serve to promote our usefulness toward our fellow men. The man who diligently acquaints himself with the negotiation of his neighbors and neglects his own business becomes an object of censure. He who eagerly studies the history and anxiously regards the movements of foreign nations and pays no attention to the history and legislation of his own country justly renders himself ridiculous in the estimation of every honest and intelligent citizen. So too that man whose privilege it is to stand midway between the kingdom of nature and that of immortal spirits, who might recognize in himself one of the highest beings in nature, who can look down upon and investigate everything below himself, who knows the soil which he cultivates and stars which regulate the seasons, who is the measure of the earth and all it contains, and who unites what is dispersed in nature, every power and every beauty in himself. Although he eagerly drinks from the rich fountain of general knowledge, if he learns not to know himself, his frailties, his human weakness, his sinful nature, and at the same time his duties and noble capacities, will after all seem awkward to the eye of the community and subject himself to the censure of the world. Man, as a relative being, stands intimately related to the world, and it is only when he brings his own personal peculiarities to harmonize with external influence that he can properly meet the object of his existence. Thus he can accomplish only so far as he is thoroughly acquainted with himself. From the proceeding, it follows that self-knowledge constitutes the foundation rock of the lofty structure of general knowledge. Without it, the structure, like the house on sandy bottom, will be subject to foreign influence, driven here and there at pleasure, having nothing fixed nor stable, and the subject himself will be disqualified for his responsibilities and duties. Sounds like some people I know. Knowledge, we are told, puffeth up and maketh man proud and haughty. This charge is perhaps not groundless when the subject is not acquainted with himself, but self-knowledge, which reveals the hidden evil of our hearts and looks into the secret recesses of our minds and exposes to our view our faults and imperfections, is calculated to humiliate and subdue our naturally haughty spirits. It exerts a healthful influence over our general character and awakens the nobler feelings of the soul and enables us to frame our actions in such a way that they will adorn our station. Enables us to frame our actions in such a way that they will adorn our station. Hence the necessity, and in the first place, of a thorough acquaintance with our nature. In the contemplation of our nature, we have presented before our minds a picture, at once indeed rude and uncomely, but again displaying all the beauty, magnificence, and splendor imaginable. We behold in it the dark valleys of depravity, the deserts of sin, and the polluted swamps of iniquity, without a ray of light to reveal its hidden beauties, or a single flower to shed its fragrance round. Its rich stores and treasures lie buried beneath the fragments of its own ruin. We see it deserted by all that is good and amiable, and abandoned to the frowns of an incensed deity. Such is the first stage of human nature, but again elevated by the skillful hand of an all-wise providence, fertilized by the rich stores of his goodness, and watered by the refreshing streams of long-suffering and forbearance, it is brought to bloom and blossom as the rose. Its hidden beauties are brought to the light, and its rich stores and treasures prominently presented to our view. As we contemplate it, we learn to appreciate its worth. We see its superiority over the nature of the animal. We discover in ourselves, apart from our bodies, which we have in common with the animal, mind immortal and rational in its nature, which traverses almost infinity of space and elevates us far above all other creation. We also discover in ourselves capacity for reflection, penetration, and study, together with many other mental operations of which we have no symptoms in the animal. Thus, the contemplation of our nature has, in the first place, a humiliating tendency, and as we learn to know ourselves, the deep-toned chords of our hearts swell with sympathetic feeling when we see others deviate from the path of duty in which they were wont to tread. Again, as we contemplate its beauty and worth, we learn to appreciate the power, the glory, and the goodness of Him who has cultivated in its barren wastes, endowed it with those noble faculties, impressed upon it His own image, and exalted it even to the attainment of His favor. Conscious of our entire unworthiness and of the goodness of God as manifested toward us, we also feel the debt of gratitude we owe to Him for our deliverance. Aided by the power of the Holy Spirit and the light of the gospel, we endeavor to discharge this debt by bringing our bodies and minds and all we are in conformity to His will, and by bringing our bodies, our minds, and all we are in conformity to His will. This conviction, originating as it does from a sense of gratitude, love, the most noble feeling of the soul, becomes the moving spring of our actions and sheds forth a happy influence which may tell to the eternal interests of those with whom we associate. These, kind reader, are some of the advantage derived from this department of self-knowledge. How important, then, that we should contemplate our nature. Again, we should familiarize ourselves with our character. It is strange yet true that men are exceedingly deficient in this department of science. The man who has not attended to this department of self-knowledge frequently finds himself involved in difficulties the most unpleasant. We are much disposed to estimate the character of others by our own, and where this is not fairly understood, the estimate must necessarily be unjust. We frequently condemn others for the same faults of which we ourselves are guilty, or offend at small blemishes in the character of another, which we look with perfect satisfaction upon much greater ones in our own. This is the result of self-ignorance. It is only when men are brought to understand their own character that they can form a proper estimate of that of another. And would we be useful and consistent ourselves or to others, we must understand our character. Upon a moment's reflection, the truth of this position will be manifest. Affectation, says a popular writer, is the spring of all ridicule, and self-ignorance the true source of affectation. This fact bears with as much weight and importance. He who knows not himself knows not what will beautify and adorn his character, and proudly desiring to appear to the best advantage frequently affects one entirely different from his own, and thus acting either above or beneath himself in either case becomes equally ridiculous in the estimation of the wise. The man, however, who understands his character views it in its proper light. He estimates it in according to its moral worth, and thus conducts himself in a way becoming his station. Not influenced by the vain notions of a noble birth, though he possess all the power wealth can bestow, he feels that an adverse change of fortune can bring him to circumstances of want, that he too is a man subject to all the faults, sorrows, and trials of his race, and hence he condescends to all, though humble, yet amiable, noble, and worthy deeds. but in his condescension there is a true dignity which elevates and exalts him in the estimation of the world. Another and important part of self-knowledge is a thorough acquaintance with our abilities. Many of the censures, disappointments, and sorrows of life are to be attributed to self-ignorance in this view. It is pleased Providence to award to every man certain capacities and talents which develop themselves and, if properly understood, serve to promote his usefulness to the world. The man, however, who is unacquainted with these capacities neither knows what he can nor what he cannot do. Hence he either spends his days in careless inactivity, or influenced, as men frequently are, by a vain desire to display, presumes to undertake what he by no means has power to accomplish. Thus, vainly endeavoring to grasp such laurels as lie far beyond his reach, in order that he may decorate his brow with wreaths of honor, he precipitates himself headlong down the cragged rocks of public censure, and each successive tumble brings him nearer and nearer the final gulf of dishonor and disgrace. Thus we frequently find men of very ordinary capacity endeavoring to fathom the deep principles of philosophy and reveal the faults and errors of others, with whose minds, were their own to be compared, they would be almost as a drop to the ocean, or the veriest atom to a world. Who that has read Horace's epistle to Pison has not been struck with the truth, the weight, and importance of his suggestion as contained in the following extract. Examine well, ye writers, weigh with care what fruit your genius, what your strength can bear. For when a well-proportioned theme ye choose, nor words nor method shall their aid refuse. In this, or I mistake, consists the grace and force of method to assign a place for what with present judgment we should say, and for some happier time the rest delay. He who knows his abilities contemplates well before he begins whether he will be able to perform, and in so doing never ventures beyond his legitimate sphere. Though anxious to meet the responsibilities of life and willing to endure toil and labor of civil, literary, and religious warfare, he is careful to observe that the means at hand are adequate to the object proposed. And again, there are no faults to which we are more subject and yet less conscious of than our own prejudices. These, though latent, present the greatest barriers to a fair and honest judgment imaginable. To know and understand these constitutes another important part of self-knowledge. The circumstances of our youth, our general system of education, and the selfish disposition of our hearts all seem to exert a prejudicial influence over our minds. This is manifest from our early disposition to cling to one system of opinions on religion, politics, or philosophy, and reject the other, while in reality we scarcely understand the principles of either. This is not the result of fair and honest investigation, but of mere speculative notions imbibed according to the particular circumstances with which we are surrounded. This disposition, if permitted to flow on uninterruptedly, naturally develops itself, and finally so perfectly overshadows and biases our minds as to render them impenetrable by the rays of truth or light of reason. But apart from external influence, prejudices frequently arise from a vain conviction of our own good sense and understanding. Hence we form notions and invent plans, and, supported by a good share of self-esteem, proclaim them to the world, confident of their excellence and superior merit. Should, however, another whose mind is less darkened by the black magic of by the black mantle of self-sufficiency, detect and expose their faults, though it be with all possible kindness, we immediately attribute it to ill will, envy, or ignorance on his part, and proudly resent it, never dreaming that the fault might after all lie within ourselves. Such, however, is not the case with the votarist of self-knowledge. His object is truth, and does he discover a plan or advance an idea, he views it well by the scrutinizing eye of honest judgment, weighs it in the balance of sound sense, and impartially compares it with the fair standard of truth. And does he or another discover that it is wrong, he nobly renounces it, and grasping the lingering ray of truth, rejoices that his mind may again move in that pleasing element so congenial to its growth. Reader, be persuaded to devote your attention to this important duty. Make it a frequent theme of contemplation. Learn to know yourself, and you will go forth in your respective pursuits with increased interest and delight. You may sit by the still fountains of literature, rove over the beautiful plains of art, or ascend the lofty hill of science. And in all these you will discover new charms and new beauties. It will adorn your actions, which, honorable, noble, consistent, and becoming your station, will elicit public favor and approbation. It will be to you a fountainhead of noble deeds. It will strew your path with fragrant flowers. And finally, when you stand upon the verge of an eternal world, you will look back with pleasing recollection and recall the happy day when you first resolved to make self-knowledge a theme of contemplation.